Okay, Sarah.
All right,
Hi.
hello.
There you go.
Great, it's so nice to talk to you. I am Sarah, and we'll be doing this session today on digital literacy. If you were not present for our last session, we do have a bit of review, so don't worry if you're thinking that you have missed out on something. And Anne-Marie, I have done a fatal presenter error. So I'm going to ask you if there's anything else we need to do or need to fix, because I forgot to plug in my computer before I got started, and I just got a low battery warning. So,
Oh dear.
even the international presenters occasionally mess up. So I've got my cord out and I'm plugging in right now, which is a good example of what some of the things you have to think about when you're working with digital literacy is making sure that your digital applications are actually charged up.
Exactly.
We're good to go.
Exactly. And I think everybody can understand and appreciate that that happens to all of us. So we understand. Okay, here we go.
All right, here we go. So, digital literacy, and this is an important, we're following along with 21st century skills, and hopefully you all find something interesting in our session today. So our objectives are, by the end of the session, for you to be able to describe what the 21st century literacy is, especially digital literacy. I want to give you an example of teaching digital literacy, and we're going to, I'd like you to think about some ways that you can incorporate digital literacy into lesson plans that you might be designing or developing in the future. So, before we get started, I'd just like to do a little review for those of you who were here before, and for those of you who were not on the previous session, if you want to toss in a guess inside of the chat pod, that's also great. I'd just like to know, what are the 4 C's of 21st century learning? This is one of the things we discussed. It's our first hour of this 3-part series, is around the 4 C's. So can anyone tell me, or does anyone remember what those are? And I'm going to open up that chat pod so I can see. It's always the thing with the WebEx. Don't worry if you don't type too quickly. I will give you a chance to type in some answers. So there are 4 C's in 21st century learning, and those 4 C's are 4 words that begin with C. Can anyone recall what those are, or does anyone want to guess? Oh, Ashley Winkle, just out of the box with a full answer. Creativity. Elizabeth, you're right. Collaboration. Hugo, you've got it too. Collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity. Excellent. So those are the 4 C's of 21st century learning. And in fact, the 4 C's are a starting point for a larger 21st century framework. With the 4 C's, what is the principal feature of 21st century learning? Regardless of we're teaching those lessons with collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity, we could easily do that in our classrooms in an English lesson or in a reading lesson, but there's one thing that makes these 4 C's a 21st century learning lesson. Does anyone remember what that is? Elizabeth, you got in there with collaboration. I don't know if I checked that. Excellent. And Elizabeth comes in first with the answer, embedding technology. You are absolutely correct. With 21st century learning, the 4 C's represent the learning skills. This is how our students will learn information, will learn content, will learn their literacy, will learn their English language through creativity, communication, critical thinking, and collaboration. But the key organizing feature of 21st century learning is that we are going to embed and utilize technology as much as possible. This is extremely important for us as teachers of adults, because many of our students are often with us because they want to improve not only the quality of their lives, but also the quality of their employment situation. And 21st century learning is designed to support students for the future of employment and for what they're doing. In fact, at this conference I'm at today, this conference I'm attending right now, I saw a very interesting session this morning where, in fact, my boss, Mike Mayer, who is the director of my project that I work on, said that one of the things we know from research right now is that 12-year-olds who are studying today will be getting jobs in the future that do not currently exist. because technology is developing so quickly that the students that we're currently teaching are going to grow up to do things that we can't even imagine. And one of the examples he used is, I could not have imagined when I was 12 growing up to become a drone operator or an influencer on social media. This is how technology changes. So these 21st century skills, embedding technology, very important. Again, those skills are collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. And these are the 4 C's, the learning skills of the 21st century framework. If you did not see our chat last time, just as a quick review, collaboration is about how we work together to achieve our goals. Creativity is really developing an application of the knowledge that we're learning, using what we've acquired in the classroom to think outside the box and create interesting and different solutions. Communication is what we're doing right now. It's how we talk, it's how we convey our ideas, our feelings, our opinions, our attitudes, all of those pieces that we do, even to communicate, to work together. These are all very important things. And finally, critical thinking, that really is where we get into our problem solving. It's really being innovative, finding solutions, but it's also about procedure. We understand steps, we can use logic, we're going to think things through. And in our session today, you're going to see all 4 of these C's coming together, and I think you'll really see a lot of critical thinking, so hopefully you'll really enjoy that. And of course, those 4 C's, it's all about making sure that we do this through technology and digital integration. So we're constantly thinking about how we can bring technology into the classroom to engage our students. So I wanted to do that really quick review. For those of you who are not here for our previous session, if you have any questions or comments, if you would like to add anything that you learned from our last session that you think the rest of our audience should know, this is a great time to type that in. And Anne-Marie, if you have any questions or comments, this is also a good time to jump in here and add those.
I'll just make sure to watch the chat pod so we catch everything for you.
All right. Yes, it's really interesting. At the conference I'm at right now, this is an international, it's the International Association for Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. And it's fascinating to be here and to actually be doing this Tech and Tell right now, because one of the huge topics for this conference is all around employability and the future. And there have been at least 200 sessions, if you can believe it, on 21st century learning skills, digital literacy, and the future of workforce. So it has been a really big topic for me, and it actually helped to inform some of my thinking with what we're doing today. So I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and move on. In fact, I have a question for you. Take a moment to think about this. Today we're going to talk about digital literacy. This is an aspect of 21st century learning. We know that the 4 C's are the learning skills, but what do you think are the digital literacy skills? What does that mean to you? I want you to take a second, think about it, and type in some ideas in the chat box. What do you think are the digital literacy skills we need to help our adult students develop in order to be successful in the future? And it's really interesting. We're going to go through the top 3 that we as teachers will utilize in the classroom. But again, I saw some very interesting presentations today on the type of digital literacy skills that will actually have an impact on employability in the future. So these 3 skills that we're going to look at today align very well with projections of the digital literacy skills required for 2020, 2030, 2040, and even 2050. There's really some fascinating research going on to uncover what these things are going to be. So Anne-Marie is thinking critically, absolutely, understanding critically about the info they see. Keyboard and etiquette, yeah, how we talk to each other online. In fact, this keyboarding, speaking and interacting online is a new thing that we're defining now as mediation. It's how we mediate and negotiate with technology. It's fascinating. Twitter, navigating Twitter, yep, that's definitely a skill. Being able to read emails and blogs, the vocabulary related to technology, that's great. Elizabeth was in there with research and to differentiate websites, communicate. I think these are all skills that we're going to see, and we can summarize the ideas you have here into these 3 key areas. I'm going to go through each of these step by step so you'll see what these mean. With 21st century digital literacy, we're looking specifically at 3 different types of literacy: information literacy, media literacy, and technology literacy. And I'm going to take a moment and break all of those down for you so we can see what that means. Let's start with information literacy. Information literacy is probably one of the most important of these, and this will be a bit of a focus for our session today. Informational literacy is all about helping our students understand the 5 points that you're seeing on the screen right now. It's the quality of the information that they're accessing when they're working with information online, or any information that they get through technology. They may not necessarily be online. There are lots of ways to interact with technology now. It's the quality of the sources. A great example of this is actually WhatsApp. That's just an SMS application that allows you to communicate through your phone. It's basically, for those of you who are old enough to remember, we've gone from a pager, which was just sending my phone number, to an SMS message, which allows me to send a message. And the quality of those sources where that information is coming from, that can be very important. We've actually seen challenges with really horrible information being shared on WhatsApp, and it's a problem there is because it's an encrypted application, it's very difficult to track back where bad information is coming from and how it's being distributed. So sources, that's a real challenge. We look at variety. There's so much variety. Someone said Twitter is practically impenetrable, and you are correct. The variety of content and how you engage, it can be really challenging, and building our students' ability to address that is important. The content, there is also so much content. The internet is a vast wonderland of content, and not all of it is great. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. So we want to be sure we're giving our students the appropriate skills to understand and to utilize appropriate content and to know when content may not be appropriate. And then, of course, finally, there's bias, learning to recognize bias in the variety of different informational sources we might access, be that a technical manual that's helping me understand what I need to do in my job role, or an article I may have seen a friend post on Facebook. Understanding bias and where that comes from is going to be very important for us. If you do have any thoughts or comments as we go through this, please feel free to share those in the chat box. I feel like this is a topic that might generate some ideas, and you're more than welcome to share these as we go along. Next, we have 21st century media literacy. Now, information literacy is about the information we can get. Media literacy is how we're engaging that information. It also describes how students and how our learners are involved in creating media and distributing that media themselves. So this isn't a passive intake of media. It also means the production and the sharing of media that they may do. So this could include social media if your students are active and engaged in Facebook and Twitter. It could be engaging with crowdsourcing. Maybe some of your learners are working on Wikipedia. They might be using those types of resources to get information. It could be journalism, where you have lots of different websites you can go to find visual media and to get different types of news stories. This could be the development of visual media. If they are, for example, on Instagram and they're sharing lots of pictures to try to communicate their story, then they're engaging them with visual media. This could be audio media. I know a lot of my learners right now love podcasts. They're constantly recommending podcasts to me. And it's really interesting for me because I am not a huge fan of podcasts. I love the radio, but I do not like podcasts. So it's just a preference, I think. Then we have some other things that are currently coming out, like augmented reality. I don't know if any of you have started playing around with augmented reality, but this is where you can actually use things like your cell phones, your digital smartphone devices, and you can open up an app like a Google Earth app or other different types of apps. and it will overlay on whatever you're looking at a digital projection. I'm actually studying Spanish myself right now, and in one of the applications I'm using to learn vocabulary, there's an augmented feature where I can point my phone at something and I'll get a word that pops up in Spanish because my phone will identify, my camera will identify what I've pointed at, and then the word will come up in Spanish for me. In fact, that's a Google Translate feature that you can also access for other languages. It's really interesting. Then we have virtual. I don't know if any of you have started working with VR headsets, but this is something that's absolutely coming, and we are going to be engaging with virtual reality where we might be wearing a headset, we might be wearing earphones, and really interacting physically with the virtual space. So this is something else that's really kind of coming up as another form of media literacy. How do we engage with that? How will our students engage with that? How will they be contributing to that? These are all key things. Gaming and exercises, yeah, who remembers, what was it? Wii? I want to say it was Wii, Nintendo Wii, which is actually able to read your body movements and use that to interact with the game. So that's another example of that virtual reality. And then finally, we actually have vocational media literacy. In fact, you're all on a WebEx chat as part of your job. I'm fairly sure that were it not required as part of your job, you probably never would have learned to use this application. You wouldn't be aware of how to share your information through the chat as you do right now. But this is a required vocational media literacy piece that you need to demonstrate. I myself at Pearson, we have an internal website that's kind of like a Facebook, but it's not Facebook. So that's a bit of a learning curve there, but it's a required vocational literacy piece that I myself have to engage with. So when we think about media literacy, it's not so much about what we're understanding, it's really how we're interacting with that content, how we are creating content, and how we are participating with the development of content. And then finally, we get into technological literacy. And this is actually knowing how to use the different types of technology that are available. Of course, computers and laptops, these are still very important things, especially in the workforce. However, we've really come a long way. In fact, I'm sitting in a co-working space in this, where I'm at in Liverpool, and they actually have desktop computers. I don't think I've used a desktop computer since maybe 2002, to give you an idea. So some types of computers have certainly gone out of style. A lot of people are converting to laptops. I have coworkers, however, that never do anything on a computer or a laptop. They do everything on their tablets or on their smartphones. So they have a very high-end technological literacy there. In fact, when it comes to tablets, I am useless. I use my phone all the time, but I just cannot enjoy using those big tablets. I just find them so fussy. So if that were required for my work, I would have to embrace the technological literacy and really learn how to use that. We then have applications, having these laptops, these computers. Everything now is very app-focused and app-driven, and this does require learning how to use different types of applications. I'm sure that even for your work that you're doing, you may have some required apps that you have to download as well. Then we get into mechanical literacy. Technology is changing very rapidly and very quickly, and this means that the types of tools we use inside of the workforce have also changed. I always find it fascinating. I work in education, and I'm working with an institution right now that's preparing what they call an A track and a B track of learning. And when the director started to describe it to me, he got a little, I could tell he felt a little down. He's like, well, the B track, that's vocational. As if somehow that was not a good thing. And I said to this director, I'm like, well, when you think about it, I know an awful lot about education, and I've certainly gone to university and I've done my master's degree. But that doesn't mean that I can function in my world without having someone who knows those technological skills, like how to fix my car, or someone who can actually take apart my computer and figure out how to insert new chips or to diagnose what's wrong. That's an incredible, difficult skill, and oftentimes those jobs don't require higher education. They are considered vocational. So we shouldn't be upset about those vocational tracks. And, it really inspired him, and he kind of really embraced it. Wow, in 21st century knowing, school is not the end-all, be-all. Sometimes it really is about apprenticeship and learning these different mechanical skills. And then, of course, we do have vocational-specific technological literacy. Again, that WebEx is a really good example of that. But if we have a student who is, for example, inside of the healthcare industry, they are working with a lot of vocation-specific tools, be they monitors for different types of patient systems, reporting systems that they might have to work with. These would all be reflective of the types of technological and vocational specific tools that our students would be using. So we have a lot going on here. Yep, and assistive technology, there's just so much that's really happening. So we have all of these different literacies, and this really gives us an opportunity to think about learning in a new way. This is why 21st century learning, for me, is such a fascinating subject. It's not just about those 4 C's of communication, creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration. It's how we do those 4 things through this very complicated technological space we're working inside of. And I see some great comments here in the chat room. He was able to use the computer and the internet and look information, but he bought a tablet to learn and move on. Excellent. So he's kind of advancing his technology there. Absolutely, I see Daisy has Anne-Marie, when you said to Daisy there that this helps advance careers, that's absolutely true. In fact, this 21st century piece that we're talking about today is part of a comprehensive learning framework. For those of you who were on our previous session, we covered the learning skills, again, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication. Today, we're going to cover the literacy skills, information, media literacy, and technological literacy. So we've had an introduction to that, and I'm going to show you how this works. And to get you excited and hopefully bring you back for our final and our closing session, the last part of the comprehensive 21st century learning framework are life skills. We sometimes refer to these as soft skills, and this includes flexibility, initiative, social skills, productivity, and leadership. Now, in our session today, I will not be talking directly about those life skills, but as you are looking at the activity that we work through, you might want to have that in mind, and we'll dig into this much further in our final hour of this comprehensive training. But I did want to at least introduce you to the full framework so you can start having that in your head as we go through and look at what we're doing today. All right. And I'm going to pause there for questions and clarifications. I'm going to go ahead and leave this on the screen. I know that's a lot of information, and if you're taking notes, I want to give you an opportunity to capture that. I see some exciting chat going on here in the chat box. Anne-Marie, can you summarize what's happening here? Because I'm not quite able to follow all of this, but you might have a better sense of it.
I'll do as quick as I can because they're coming in fast. Daisy was just commenting on the fact that she has used adaptive technology with working with speech therapy with children, and that is absolutely true, Daisy. Oh my goodness, I get so excited when I hear that. For some people with disabilities, this type of communication is what they need. Some people communicate with buttons. So yes, that's a very good point. And then Gareth, even people who work in technology can be not informed of important ideas or easily encouraged by buzzwords. So true. One technician I talked to said he called a security update an owl. Okay, so he's just talking about how just being not informed. So that's a very, very good point. And Risa, Risa says, as a PD coordinator, I like to use technology with my staff, and I'm always surprised and a little frustrated at the teachers that aren't familiar with even the most common of digital skills. And Gareth, thank you, is artificial intelligence. So I'll say great comments, great comments.
Yeah. I think I'm going to pick up from where Reese is, especially, again, because I am at a teacher conference. This is something that I have heard said several times by several presenters, and I'm going to say that to you today. Because of the needs of our future workforce, again, think about it. Students right now who are 12 and younger are going to be working in jobs that have not yet been invented. It is no longer acceptable for us as educators to not embrace technology in the classroom. If I have worked with a lot of teachers over the years who've told me, you know, Sarah, technology just isn't my thing, well, that's great for you, but you know what? That 8-year-old student who's going to be doing a job you can't even imagine needs those skills. And your job as the educator is to support that learning. So we are now at a point with what we're doing inside of our industry where it is really important that we embrace those digital skills. And Risa, I feel your pain. I'm still constantly working on improving the digital skills of some of the colleagues I work with. So I do appreciate that comment. So what I want to do now is look at how we can bring all of this information together to create a meaningful learning experience. And if you've attended my sessions before, you know we're going to do a bit of a lesson plan here. So you'll see a digital literacy lesson that we're going to get into today. And the focus of our digital literacy lesson today is going to be around information literacy. But after we go through our little mini lesson, I'm going to ask you to point out all of the other aspects of that digital literacy framework that we've gone through. Again, information literacy, media literacy, and technological literacy. So I'll ask you to tell me how those things came up. Now, for those of you who know me, you know that I am an objective-focused teacher. I like to make sure the content and my lesson plans are aligned to my objectives and the standards that I need to meet. I also want to be sure that any learning I'm introducing in my classroom is going to help drive progress for my students. So when I was thinking about today's lesson plans, this is a bit of a busy slide, so I apologize. Do be sure to go to the PD portal if you'd like to review this content. It's a bit much, and I'm not sure you'll have enough time to take notes. So remember, this will be available online after the chat for your review. And what I have now, I'm thinking about my student, and if you can see here in a CASAS range, they're right on the cusp between a CASAS 220 and starting into that CASAS 221 to 235. If you know those NRS levels, this makes them a high intermediate, moving slowly into that advanced space. If you're familiar with English language learning or you work with ESL, this will be a GSE 43. So my student is really just on the cusp of entering advanced learning. And my goal is to push them there. I want to make sure they achieve that advanced learning as soon as possible. So I want to plan to make sure that my content is going to be slightly above and then pushing them even further. Here for today, we're going to use, you can see here a content standard. The sub-area is reading, and I'm looking at content standard F from sub-area 1-2 or I2. And this is the comprehension of expository text. So we're going to be looking into how students draw inferences and analyze information. And specifically, we're going to look at distinguishing facts and opinions, as well as the analysis of the information and the quality of that information. For those of you who might be working with English language learners, this aligns very well to English language learning skills, like understanding factual titles and headlines, making basic inferences and predictions, and recognizing tone. So this is a lesson you could use with just for literacy for education, and if you have some students who are also language learners, this would be a great lesson for those students as well. So I want you to play along a bit. We will kind of have a bit of expository here, but I want you to imagine that you're actually taking this lesson. And I'm going to do a bit of role play. We'll use the chat box for you to interact with me, and then we'll summarize at the end. So I have a picture on the screen for you today, and can you tell me in the chat, what do you see? What's on the screen there? And if I mute my mic, Anne-Marie, it's because I'm having a bit of a cough. It's the weather in Liverpool. I went from New Orleans, which was quite warm, to Liverpool, which is the same temperature as Chicago. So it's been pretty good. All right, Risa says newspapers. Elizabeth, old news. Yeah, this is different types of newspapers. So around the world, we've got newspapers. A lot of us interact with different types of news. And today, what I'd like to help you understand when you're looking at newspapers or you're reading the news, I want you to understand, one, how to use a news website. What do you do with a news website? Where can you go with a news website? And the second thing I want to think about is bias. So we're going to take a little bit of time to understand what bias is and what that means when we're looking at information like the news. So I have a question for you, my students. How do you get your news? I'm sure some of you get news. We've talked about news in the classroom before, current events that you're aware of. So how do you get news when you want to engage with that? I'll give you a second to type some answers into the chat box there. So in a class, this is a discussion activity, and I would be eliciting my answers from my different students. All right, so Hugo says online. Risa reads the paper. Latricia, newspapers. Oh, and she reads articles in other languages. Elizabeth has news apps. So, and Daisy is YouTube Live on your phone. All right. Kelly is the radio. Reese she likes to read online. So a lot of us are getting our news now. I think only one person said, one or two people said newspaper. So many of us now are getting our news online. And Gareth, online discussions. Maybe you're just getting your news through an online discussion that you like to participate in. In fact, there are many different sources of news, and you can see some of the sources on the screen. That includes, just like Gareth said right there at the bottom, chatting with friends and coworkers, either online or in person. That's a great way to get the news. It could be newspapers. It could also be television. Some people still like to watch the news on TV, or even I used to love to watch the 10 o'clock news on TV that was really local and told me about what was happening in town. I even now digitally, I subscribe to the Chicago newspaper so I can see what's happening in Chicago, even though I'm frequently on the road. The challenge sometimes that we have to be aware of when we're looking at the news is this word right here, bias. Can anyone tell me, does anyone know what this word means? We've hinted, we've worked around it a little bit before, hopefully you remember, but what is bias? And Gareth, sometimes you can spend a little too much time with the news. I agree. Every once in a while, I have to take a news break and just, you know what, I'm going to read books, comic books, and books in other languages instead of taking in a lot of the news. All right, so you've got some answers on bias. Kelly said it's when something is very one-sided, or it's Latricia taking a side. So it's very clear that there's some position. Subjectivity. It's really about, they've really created a subject and they've got a very specific point. Anne-Marie, tendency to present facts and ideas that only support one side. Or Hugo, how we see or understand things. And Hugo, that's a great statement. Sometimes it's not intentional when we have bias. It's just us sharing the way that we see and understand something. So it is possible for us to experience things in very different ways. I want you to take a look at the screen here. I've got some arrows. Can you tell me how the arrows are pointing out bias in these two different news stories? And for those of you who do interact online, you might recognize this was kind of going around the news today. All right, so you have a particular worldview, sure. And how is the bias being presented to us? That's a very specific way that we're seeing bias. All of these arrows are pointing that out to us. So I see Latricia said some sexism. So Latricia, can you tell me how you're seeing the sexism? I think that's a great one. And can look at the different pictures being used to illustrate these articles. Is that what you're going for, Latricia? Because one of the ways that we sometimes engage with bias is through the presentation, the way that the visual presentation is developed. If you look here at this photo on the left, our gentleman here is looking very professional in his business suit, where the woman in question here is taking a selfie, and it looks like she's just being, if we think about this as Instagram or as a model. So it's kind of comparing and contrasting, and I think we've got a lot of sexism. But think about this. The sexism is not here being presented through language. It's being presented through the pictures. So I think that's a very important thing to take in mind. Right, so there's some bias here in that someone is trying to make you think that AOC is wrong. In fact, you can actually see that here, a little bit of bias inside of the headline at the top, where Ryan says he wasn't interested in his advice. So he's saying, oh, she didn't listen to me, she ignored me, and that was the wrong thing. But how is that different? What's the bias on the right side? Can anyone see that here? How can you see that bias? You're absolutely correct, Gareth, that it is, the left is making AOC out to be wrong, and the right is making Ryan out to look like a buffoon. And what word are they using on the right side that can help you see that bias? Mansplain, he got it right there. He's also making what looks like a really goofy face, and she's looking more professional and put together on the right side. So again, it's not just the language and the way things are being presented, it's also the visual image that's being presented. And I find it very interesting when you go online and you start looking at these things, they always put these headlines and the visuals right at the top. So as soon as you go in and you start reading those stories, you're immediately starting to engage with the bias that can be presented in those stories. So that's very important. Now, we've been working with bias before, and I have some questions that we can use to understand when you look at the news what kind of bias is being presented. Now, as you can see on the screen, there are 5 questions here, and it's not easy to remember to do this every time we see the news. But if you have these questions in the mind when you're engaging with content, this can really help you recognize bias. One of those questions, who is this created for? Who is the news created for? What creative techniques were used to attract my attention, like those pictures that we saw? What different people, will different people get the same message? I think it was really interesting if you think about those 2 stories. On the left side, the message that you're going to get is, this woman did not respect the man who was trying to give her information. But on the right side, you get the message that this man is not a nice guy and he's being condescending, and the woman is, she should be allowed to just do her own thing. So you've got 2 different people. If I'm reading those articles, I'm going to have a very different experience than someone else. We also have to think of the values. What kind of values are being presented by the 2 different types of content that we might be reading, or really by any content that we're reading. And finally, why? Why did somebody write this article? Because even that starts to introduce a certain type of bias. Bias is not necessarily bad because, as Hugo said before, it really is how we see or understand things. We may not even recognize that we've introduced that, and sometimes our journalists try very hard not to. So if you are reading and engaging with your news with these types of questions, this can really help to make sure that you are aware of the potential for bias and ready to engage with it. Now, in order to practice with our questions, one of the things we need to do is to find some news. So, I'm going to ask you, what is this? What do you see on the screen here? Can anyone tell me what that is? And Risa, I see you're having a thought there where you recognize some age-related bias. I have to admit, I've been recognizing some age-related bias myself this week. Daisy, yes, this is an article. Great. So I'm seeing a news article on the screen, and I'm going to ask you some questions. Now, in the classroom, I would actually pass this out as a handout. So I apologize that I can't do that here right now, but I want you to imagine that I'm going to ask these questions while you're looking at this. So if I wanted to ask you to find a news story like this, I could say to you to take out your phone or your tablet. So I want to teach you how to find some news. And what I'd like you to do, I don't want you to do this right now, but in an actual classroom, I would have my students do this. I want to ask the question, what do you use to get to a website? How do you find a website? What tool do we use to get to a website? Who knows what that is? If I'm on my smartphone, it might be different from my computer. Can anyone tell me what we use to get to news on a website? What are you here for? A browser, excellent. So normally we'll use a browser. So we have Firefox or Chrome. Some of us might be using Firefox or Chrome or Safari if you're on Apple, but we do tend to use those browsers. We could also use an app on a phone, so those are different ways to get to websites. Now, if I want to find a certain web address and I don't know what it is, how would I find it? Kelly mentioned Google. That's certainly one way to find it. What do we call Google? Google is a certain type of website. What do we call that? Great. Lisa has it right out of the box. That's a search engine. And now I'm not going to ask you to do this, but just imagine I would have my students open up a browser on their phone, and I want them to search for the Times in plain English. And that, if they do that search, that's going to bring them back to our web article that we have right here. Now, I'm going to ask you, we're going to do this activity together while my article is on the screen. You're going to, in a classroom environment, I'd have you work with your partner, but we're just going to work as a group online. If I want to find news stories by topics, where would I look on the screen? Would I be upper left? Am I right, top right? Am I bottom right? Am I bottom left? Am I center? Am I top, bottom? Where would I find the topics? Who can tell me? Great. I can find topics in the header, yeah. And the mid-bottom, right over here, there's a bar that says topics. Great. What if I want to find the search bar? Where is the search bar? Yep, under search on the upper left. Excellent. So in the classroom, I would actually have my students, I'd put this up on my presentation, and I'd have my students identify all of these different parts of the website. I want to make sure they understand how to use the website and how to find those different stories. Once I've engaged my students in this, the next thing I would have my students do is to actually find a news story in this website, and I want them to find this very specific website. So this is why we go through how to identify the features of the website and use all of the different parts, so they'll be able to figure out how to search for this either by topic, or they can actually use the search bar to find the article. Once I've had my students figure out how to find this article, I'm going to have them read together, and we'll go back to those questions that we introduced in the beginning. So as they're reading the story, I want them to think about this. Who created the message, the techniques, who will get, what kind of message will we get? Will we all get the same message? What are the values? And then why? Why was this written? So again, I'm trying to raise their awareness of the type of bias that might be presented. And then finally, this is something I would really like my students to do, is to think about other things they can look for to help them identify bias more quickly in the future. It is hard to hold all of those questions in our mind at the same time, so I want them to create some rules that they can use to identify bias, like looking for those pictures or looking for words like mansplain that will immediately jump out to them and help them understand what they're doing when they're reading the news. And then finally, we would finish up by summarizing our objectives, and I would ask my students to tell me or to give me examples of how they now understand how to use a news website. And then I would ask them to give me some examples of how they can understand bias, and I would ask them to share with me their ideas of what they can do the next time they're reading an article to recognize whether or not that article has bias. And this is a 21st century lesson that is focused on understanding information literacy with an emphasis on recognizing bias. But for you, because you have been on my call today, I'm just very quickly going to ask you, can you tell me how this lesson today used either the 4 C's or how it used some of those other literacy skills like media literacy and technological literacy? Did anyone notice those pieces inside of my lesson today? Oh, Ashley, thank you. I'm glad, you know, this is just, I'm not sure what HSE is. I live in a world of many acronyms and there are always new ones, but I'm glad that this would be good practice. I want to say high school, but I'm not sure. Sometimes the local acronyms, high school equivalency. Okay, it's what I thought it was, but I'm like, I've been in acronym land for 4 days, so there are some new ones for me this week, and I wasn't sure. So sure, high school equivalency. And again, I just want to point out that just in case, with our 4Cs here, we had the critical thinking. I'm helping to build my students' ability to look for bias. We had collaboration. That was the group work where my students are working in pairs, and frequently I do this in my class. Communication, that will be our talking with our partner, our reading the article, and then communicating the information from the article while processing through those questions. And then we have creativity. That's where they create their own personal tips to recognize bias in the future. So we were learning how to recognize bias using all 4 of our learning skills. We were also using our information literacy skill of evaluating content. So we're digging into the content and making sure it's appropriate. But we did have a touch of media literacy. I made sure that my students understood how to use content-specific websites and understood website design so they could utilize those features. And we had the technological literacy where they really dug in and had to search and navigate through the website where they're going to really engage with it. So we're really getting all of our different parts. And as an extra credit, if you want to think about this for homework, how would the life skills also play out in this lesson plan? Because I promise you, I did incorporate some of those life skills. I just did not point out what those life skills were today. So this is how we can use that 21st century framework. We're building literacy skills. And again, remember, this related back to my content standards of evaluating the quality of information that I'm learning, as well as developing those different types of language skills. So this is absolutely meeting objectives that I am required to meet and developing the skills that I want to develop with my learners. And now we have come, again, to the end of another lovely Tech and Tell session, and I did leave some time at the end here for questions. So I just want to see, do we have any questions or comments? And Anne-Marie, this is a great time for you to jump in as well to share some of your thoughts.
Well, I'm just looking up here and seeing if I missed anything. I don't think I missed anything. There was just a lot of answering your questions, so that was good. And I just wanted to jump in. I think Sarah and I both are passionate about integrating different things in one lesson, and I hope that everyone sees. That you can be teaching the 21st century digital literacy skills at the same time you're doing a standards-based lesson with the standards, the content standards. I want you to hopefully see, we both, because we've talked a lot about this, we both are passionate about you seeing both. And so I hope you guys can see that they're interwoven. You don't have to be teaching 21st century digital literacy skills separate from when you're teaching a standard. They go together. And so let me jump over to this question. Okay, so Daisy, the answer to this question, this PowerPoint is going to be available as an outline inside the course when it's available in the PD portal, okay? So I hope that answers that question. The PowerPoint's not going to be available as a standalone PowerPoint. It's going to be converted. The course, there'll be a course and then the outline with all the information that she's presented will be available as an outline. So I hope that answers your question. I hope it does. Okay, good. And yeah, so you're not going to miss anything. Let me just make that clear. You won't have all the beautiful graphics and her amazing pictures, but you're going to have all the information there for you. Good question. Okay, go ahead, Sarah. Sorry, I didn't want to jump over you.
I wanted to point out today, if you were curious about those questions, that's not a Sarah invention. These are actually called Q-tips, and these come from the Media Lit Kit, which is a resource developed for teachers to help teach and understand bias. So I've put Media Lit Kit in there. I need to, Anne-Marie, this is one of my links I forgot to update. So I will update this link for the Tech and Tell for when it goes on the PD portal. But if you do a quick Google search of Media Lit Q-tips, you will get to those questions that I was using today, because I don't like to reinvent the wheel, and there are several dozen excellent resources for teaching bias and for understanding bias in the classroom. And when I update this presentation to share with all of you, I will make sure to include those different And Anne-Marie is right on top of it. Thank you so much. I will make sure to include links to any of those references I think that you'll find useful today. So if you're ready to create some interesting literacy lessons that incorporate bias, this will help with evaluation and understanding things. You'll certainly be able to do that.
Oh my gosh, and I'm on this website, everybody, afterwards. If you have some time, go check it out. I'm already excited. This looks like an amazing website. So hopefully you click on the link. Those of you, click on it and save it to your bookmarks bar. And if not, email me.
I know.
And I'll send
Anne-Marie,
it to you.
I know how much you love a good website that's a free resource.
Yep. Oh, I know.
And here's the next one that you can pull up for me on Google really quickly. So the 21st Century Learning Framework, again, this is not a Sarah Davila invention. This is part of research we've been supporting inside of Pearson. We've got several different research projects right now that we're supporting. We're basically investing in this research to share that with teachers around the world with no requirement to buy, with nothing to sell you. And one of those is the P21 21st Century Learning Framework. They also have a fairly comprehensive website with teacher tips, supports, free lessons, and also free tools. And that would be another one of those websites that Anne-Marie can probably Google and drop in there very quickly for you. And I will again add that to my list of links that will be available with the slide deck that you'll get today.
Okay, not doing as well on this one. So, okay, it's a PDF, right? Is it a PDF?
Yeah, it's a big PDF. But there should be a website for it, for P21.
Let me see. Well, let's see. Let me see here.
For a second. I know right where it is because it's on my computer.
Okay.
But I think I have to share it through the app.
Yeah, and I do not want to grab the wrong one. I have a couple up here.
Nope, I got it.
I think that's the same one I had.
Let me share. Yep, this is the one. So they recently did something very similar because when you buy a web link, sometimes you want to change things, and it's just easier to redirect. So they're doing a redirect, and I remember this, and that makes it confusing.
Okay.
So here it is. This is the P21 Partnership for Learning. Yep, you got the right one.
Yep.
And this is some great resources, and you can see here that 21st Century Learning Framework is right there. You'll note that we're really digging in right now into the 21st century learning, but you can see that this has an impact on learning, career, and information and media literacy. Those life and career skills, those are the soft skills, and that will be the feature of our Part 3 presentation. So Part 1, we covered the learning and innovation skills. Those are the 4 C's. Today, we looked into information and media technology skills, and on our next and final webinar in this series, we're going to look at the life and career skills. And so this is how we bring all of that information together. Again, this is an open public resource. This is research being done for teachers by educators and research experts around the world. And I want you to absolutely not engage and believe me just because I told you. That's not good media literacy and it's not good information literacy. Do be sure to go off and do your own homework, research these different frameworks, read through our research, and figure out how you can bring these things into your classroom. Hopefully the lesson plan and the little bit of a lesson that I gave you today gave you some ideas and started to spark some interest. And as we continue with this series and go through our final piece, I really look forward to seeing what you're going to do and how you're going to use this inside of your own classrooms.
So I want to jump in here. We're 2 minutes, and I do know that Sarah has got to literally jump on a plane somewhere.
Well, I got to go to London to get that plane.
Exactly. So she's got to go from Liverpool to London, and she's got to get on a train. So on behalf of Train PD, I want to thank Sarah again